Today is a very big day, and I'm going to tell you why. Because today is the first day that I, an independent, nonpartisan political observer, can legitimately say that Democrats have a real chance at winning the Senate majority in November. They've always had, a puncher's chance, right? Like, because there's enough seats out there that they could win. But up until today, I was pretty skeptical. I could buy a scenario where it happens, but it kind of felt like a triple bank shot or a triple Lindy in that Rodney Dangerfield movie Back to School. Like, yeah, possible, plausible-ish, but very, very, very unlikely. Like 10% chance or under. Okay, so you're asking yourself, what happened today, Monday, January 12th, that changed your mind, Chris? Great question. That's why you guys are the best subscribers across the entire internet. And this is what happened. And I want to explain both the narrow impact and the broad impact in this video. Mary Peltola, former Alaska Congresswoman, Democrat, announced, and this had been speculated, and I've made videos about this, but announced that she had decided to run for the U.S. Senate this November. She was choosing between the Senate race and the governor's race. She said on Monday that she is going to run for the Senate against two-term Alaska Republican Senator Dan Sullivan. Okay, so like I said, there's the kind of narrow why this matters and then the really big why this matters. Let's do the narrow why it matters first. Alaska, as you probably have figured out, is not exactly like friendly Democratic territory. It is also not as Republican as you might think. Donald Trump won the state by 14 points in 2024, but he won other states by far, far larger margins. So there's a history. Most Alaska voters are independents or choose not to state voters. They are not Republicans or Democrats. There are more registered Republicans than there are registered Democrats, but it's still like a third of all voters, and 60+% of voters are undecided or independent or choose not to state voters. So it's a little bit more competitive than you might think. Generally, Democrats can win, though they usually don't. What Peltola's candidacy means is simple. This is now a real race. Had she run for governor, or had she decided she wasn't going to run for anything, Dan Sullivan, the Republican incumbent, absolutely coasts to re-election. There's no question about that. And Alaska comes off the board. But Peltola's candidacy now gives Democrats a real case to make about this being a competitive state rather. Peltola was elected to Alaska's House seat in 2020 and reelected in 2022. She lost re-election in 2024. Why does that matter? Because Alaska's population is small, which means it only has one House district, which means that when you get elected to the House, you get elected statewide. You are a statewide elected official. So Peltola got elected statewide as a Democrat in 2020 and 2022 and was on the ballot in 2024. Sullivan, the last time he was on the ballot was 2020. So Peltola has been on the ballot multiple times, and at least in all three of those races, especially the two she won, but even the one she lost, she showed an ability to win over voters who are not hardcore Democrats. She's going to have money. She's a good candidate. She was the first Alaska native to be elected to the House. So she's got a lot going for her. She's a really intriguing profile, a genuine moderate. And that means Alaska's on the board in a really competitive race. So that's the narrow picture. Before I get to the broad picture, give me 10 seconds to give you a pitch. I want you to subscribe to this channel because I am independent, authentic, and I'm making videos every single day about the world of politics. It is, I think, going to be an amazing, fascinating, complex 2026, and I hope you sign on to follow me. Okay, the bigger picture. So let's take one quick step back and do a little Senate math. Right now, Republicans have 53 seats in the Senate to 47 seats for Democrats. There are technically only 45 Democrats. There are two independents, Bernie Sanders of Vermont, Angus King of Maine, but they caucus with Democrats and vote most of the time with Democrats. So really 53-47. With Donald Trump in the White House, and as importantly, J.D. Vance is both his vice president and the head of the president of the Senate, the guy who breaks 50-50 tie votes in the Senate, Democrats would need to net 4 seats in order to retake the majority, right? Because if it was 50-50, Vance would break votes in favor of Republicans and Republicans would effectively have the majority. All right, so how does that work? Where could those 4 seats come from, and why am I more optimistic today about those chances than I have been in a while? Let's do the Democratic seats first. seats Democrats currently hold. There are only 13 of them up in 2026, which is good for Democrats. Less vulnerability, less seats. 2 of those seats are in states that Donald Trump won in 2024. Georgia and Michigan. So in Georgia, Jon Ossoff is the Democratic incumbent. He was elected in a special election in 2020, early 2021. He is going to have a real race, but he's an incredible fundraiser. He's already raised over $50 million for the race. And the Republican primary seems to me very likely to be nasty, kind of a proxy fight between Donald Trump and outgoing Governor Brian Kemp. In Michigan, that's where Gary Peters, Democratic incumbent, decided not to run again. Republicans have united behind Mike Rogers, former member of Congress, guy who almost won the Senate seat in 2024 against Alyssa Slotkin. And Democrats do have a crowded primary. There are 3 major serious candidates. I think any of the 3 of those candidates, though, are pretty good general election nominees. And I think a lot of Michigan depends on which way the national wind is blowing. Remember, it's basically evenly divided state. I think the Democratic winds are blowing, right? And I think that will help the Democratic nominee. Outside of those 2 states, there's not a lot of Democratic vulnerability out there. The only other state I'll throw in is New Hampshire. Jeanne Shaheen, Democratic incumbent, isn't running again. Republicans have a primary between John Sununu, former U.S. Senator, and Scott Brown, former Massachusetts Senator who now lives in New Hampshire. I think Sununu would be the better general election nominee. Not sure he can win the primary. Democrats have united behind Chris Pappas, member of Congress, running a good campaign. And again, a lot will depend on what the national atmosphere looks like in that state. And I think the national atmosphere is going to favor Democrats. So I lean that one toward Pappas and Democrats in New Hampshire. Outside of that, Minnesota's an open seat. I don't see Republicans competing there. There's really not a lot there. Okay, so let's just assume for the sake of this argument that Ossoff gets reelected and one of the Democrats in Michigan keeps that seat in the Democratic column, so Democrats don't lose any of their own seats. Turn to the Republican side. You have 22 Republicans up. So remember, only 13 Democrats, 22 Republicans. The issue for Democrats, though, is that of those 22 states that are up, that are Republican held, only one is a state that Kamala Harris won in 2024. That's Maine, where Susan Collins is running again. She's got elected in 1996 and continues to get reelected. So in order for Democrats to win those, again, they have to net 4 seats. So even if they lose 0 of their own seats, they have to win 4 Republican seats. In order for them to come close to that happening, they absolutely have to win in both Maine and North Carolina. So in Maine, there's a primary. Janet Mills, the term-limited governor, is the kind of establishment candidate on the Democratic side. Graham Plattner has the endorsement of Bernie Sanders, among others, and it's kind of the liberal favorite raising a ton of money. I don't know who will win that primary. I think the race will be close no matter what because Maine is a Democratic-leaning state. In North Carolina, Democrats got their best possible nominee, Roy Cooper, former 2-term attorney general, former 2-term governor of the state, popular, moderate. Republicans have unified behind Michael Whatley, who's the former chair of the Republican National Committee. They say he's going to be a good candidate. I tend to think that Cooper is the better of those 2 candidates, which could be canceled out by the fact that while North Carolina is a swing state, Republicans usually win it. But remember what I said, if those wins nationally are blowing at Democrats back in Republicans' faces, that can make the difference there. So let's say, again, for the sake of argument, that Democrats pick up Maine and North Carolina. Now they need 2 other seats. And where are those 2 other seats going to come from? Well, the truth is they're going to come from places that lean Republican overall, right? These are all states that Donald Trump won by varying margins, but this is where Alaska really starts to matter. So Alaska is absolutely in that group, as is Iowa, Ohio, and Texas. Okay, I'm going to go through each of them, but what you need to know is those are 4 seats of which Democrats would need to win 2. So Alaska being on the board just grows the national landscape. It grows the potential for Democrats to have a little bit of margin for error. What's hard is if you have a national map where you have to win, there are 2 seats that are Republican held and they're long shots and you have to win those 2 and there are no other seats on the board, you have no margin for error. With Alaska being added in there and Texas in there, you now have a little bit more margin for error. So they have to win 50% of those 4 races. I think their best chances, at least today, are in Alaska and Ohio. I've explained Alaska both in a previous video and this one. Look, Peltola is a serious candidate who has demonstrated appeal across the aisle. She's going to raise the money. One other thing I'll note, Alaska has ranked choice voting, which should help Peltola potentially be competitive among independent voters who don't sort of side with either candidate or either party. Ohio is a similar situation. Like Alaska, it's a Republican-leaning state. It's not as Republican as Alaska, but it's a Republican-leaning state. Like Alaska, Democrats got their best candidate, former Senator Sherrod Brown, who lost in 2024 to Bernie Moreno for the Senate. Unlike Alaska, where Dan Sullivan has won 2 terms and is running for a third, in Ohio, John Husted, who is the lieutenant governor who got appointed to the Senate after J.D. Vance got elected vice president, has never faced voters as a senator before. So I guess I'd put Ohio slightly ahead of Alaska for both it's a little less Republican and the appointed senator thing. But I think those 2 are your best opportunities after the top 2 of North Carolina and Maine. And then we get into Iowa and Texas. Both have primaries. On the Democratic side, Texas is almost entirely dependent on John Cornyn not being the incumbent, not being the Republican nominee. I think it is likely there will be a runoff in that state. Primary is March 3rd. Runoff is 6 weeks later or 2 months later. You have John Cornyn, very controversial state attorney general Ken Paxton, and Wesley Hunt, a member of Congress, running for that nomination. I think it's unlikely any of those 3 get 50% of the vote, which would mean the top 2 will go into a runoff. I think it'll probably be Cornyn and Paxton, and I think Paxton will win that, which opens the possibility that Democrats could win because Paxton is not every Republican in Texas's cup of tea. Democrats have their own primary, controversial Rep. Jasmine Crockett against State Rep. James Tallarico. I think Tallarico is the better general election nominee. Don't know who will win that primary. In Iowa, I actually think Republicans' chances got better when Joni Ernst, the Republican senator, announced she wasn't running again, and Ashley Hinson, member of Congress, unified the Republican Party behind her candidacy. Democrats, again, crowded primary. I think there are 2 state senators, Josh Turek and Zach Walz, who are the most likely nominees. I think Turek would be the better nominee. He's a guy who's been in a wheelchair his entire life. He's a Paralympian in wheelchair basketball. Amazing story, and represents a district in the state Senate that Donald Trump won. So again, is it for sure? No. But could I see a scenario where Democrats don't lose any of their own seats and win North Carolina, Maine, Alaska, and Iowa, or North Carolina, Maine, Alaska, and Ohio? North Carolina, Maine, Ohio, and Texas. Yes. I don't think it's 50-50. I think it's probably a little less than 60-40 that Republicans hold the Senate, but that's a real conversation. That's a 40% is a real chance. That is not a, well, if I bank it off of there and over there and it hits that and this and that, and then it goes in. No, we are now in plausible chance territory, and that's a major accomplishment for Democrats. Doesn't mean they will win the majority, but it now means, at least for me, that the majority conversation is one worth having. All right, that's it for me. As I said earlier in the video, I do hope you become a subscriber. Independent, authentic, making daily videos. If you want, you can look into my membership, the Diamond Club, which is my membership tier, $6.99 a month. You get 2 to 3 more videos every single week, including my video podcast with Chuck Todd and my worst week in Washington. You can also like and comment on this video in particular, which helps me grow my community on YouTube, especially among people who aren't subscribers. Last thing, be an evangelist. Tell a person or 2 or 10 or 20 about what I'm building here and why you think it's important. 2026 is going to be a fascinating, complex year. I hope you come along for the ride with me. Take care.